All right, good day, everybody, and thank you for taking part in our presentation entitled Speed to Value, How to Deliver Quality in Your Warehouse Management System. So today's presentation, we're going to go over how to speed up and really retain the quality of your warehouse management system setup and implementation and upgrade. This is maybe not so much pertaining to warehouse management systems only, but also ERP systems, large CRM, and other enterprise software could really follow these things. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will take home with you to your organization a couple of ideas that can help you kind of speed up and bring quality to your presentation or your solution set. As a quick introduction, my name is Jeff Constable. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Tryon Solutions. I have about 25 years of experience in the enterprise software space. Majority of it is in the supply chain execution space. I run marketing and business development teams here. Richard?
Hey, my name is Richard Fast. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect at Tryon Solutions. I have had over 20 years of supply chain experience working in various companies, going from QA tester to super user all the way to an architect now. So mostly dealing with warehouse management systems, all different varieties, and happy to be here.
Awesome. And a little bit about Tryon Solutions is we've been around for about 17 years. And we manage all the technology and the operations around supply chain execution tools. So warehouse management systems, labor management, and transportation tools. We have about 100 people around the world, and we help organizations not just with implementations, but also upgrades and continuous improvement projects, which also include testing and our strategy and alignment group. So a little bit from an agenda perspective, we're going to talk about what is speed to value in a warehouse management system mean. A little bit about where does value get lost, right? A lot of organizations, that's kind of where we come and play, is helping organizations really understand the value. But we often come across a lot of ideas and processes and tools that kind of get lost. Richard's going to go a little bit into about what we have seen in real life, some stories, and then really what drives value. How can we make things faster? How can you make things faster in your organization? And at the end, we're going to kind of cap off about how to sustain that performance throughout time. So my first slide here is kind of really the definition of what speed is and then what is value, that we're all on the same page. So from a speed perspective, it's really how quickly something moves from start to finish. I'm sure everyone is in agreement with me. And also quality. What does quality mean? So it's really, as I mentioned here, consistently meeting or exceeding the requirements and expectations that not just you, but your whole team and how your organization has. So hopefully that everyone agrees with those two statements there. Richard?
All right. So I'm going to ask the audience a question here. What are two words in supply chain that cause you the most anxiety? I'll give you a minute to think about it. And no, it's not your boss calling you. I know that does give people anxiety sometimes. Well, I guess it depends on who you are, right? So if you're in operations, it might be a failed audit or physical inventory. If you're in IT, like myself, maybe the system went down or you have a very bad deployment. Sales is probably talking about canceled orders or missed deliveries. And leadership is probably more focused on missed commitments or slipping margins. And of course, finance, right? They're always worried about budget and unexpected write-offs. So every role has their own version of this. But in my experience, there's one that cuts across all of them. And that is go live, right? So go live is the moment where everything becomes real. Up until this point, everything is controlled. You're planning, you're designing, you're testing in a structured environment, and you can stop and fix something and try it again. But then when you get to go live, right? And now everything is happening at once. Orders are coming in, people are using the system, decisions are being made in real time. And this is where the planning turns into execution. This is where the assumptions that you've created get tested. And this is where all the risks show up, whether you're ready or not. And that's why this moment makes people uncomfortable, because you don't really know how things are going to behave until you're in it.
So that leads to the point of where does this value get lost? And I'm sure a lot of you listening to this and watching this are going to kind of nod your head through these things, but we're seeing kind of three major buckets of where things and where the value gets lost. Is first of all, kind of we hear a lot about overloaded and disconnected teams, right? So as Richard mentioned in the prior slide, IT is one of the departments that kind of gets hammered with this stuff. Is IT teams are very good at what they do, but they're stretched thin across the whole organization and have a lot of systems and processes that kind of keep track of. That leads to a lot of kind of manual and siloed processes that people don't know where they are, maybe don't know a lot about what that process actually is. And that really leads to a lot of IT and operation misalignment, right? The second bucket is really kind of inefficient and outdated processes, right? You might have had an old warehouse management system, or I'm sorry, a warehouse management system you've had for a long time. But then those old processes, which might have happened and were really good back 10 years ago, don't really work anymore. Things change, right? So that leads to downtime. The second part of that is there's really, what we hear a lot from our customers is really no plan for any kind of continuous improvement. The system worked really well 10, 15 so years ago, but as the climate changes, if you will, and the organizations and customers change, that improvement needs to be done. And that also leads to very high costs and a lot of firefighting that has to be done to change things. Little changes here and there add up a lot. And obviously that also leads to a lot of labor inefficiencies, which can also drive up the cost. The third part is really missed opportunities where there's a lot of risk that can be taken. We hear a lot that a lot of data. There's really not a lot of metrics to take from those, right? Data's missing. Metrics we can't really achieve. Metrics we can't abide by. And from that perspective, it's very hard to communicate how things are going to your leadership team, right? How is the system doing? Are we getting more products out the door? Is it efficient? Are our customers happy? There's a lot of time put into that, but there's a lot of risk that goes with that too. So that means that sometimes you're falling behind because of maybe compliance risks. I think of an industry like the food and beverage industry has a lot of changes from a governmental perspective. And it leads to a lot of stalling of systems, a lot of products stalling, a lot of items that aren't going out the door as fast as it can. So that's really where value gets lost. Those are kind of the big three buckets we hear a lot from of our customers, and maybe some of you are nodding your head as well.
All right, so we see this pattern play out over and over again, right? It doesn't all happen at once, it builds. So it usually starts on the operational side. People aren't fully comfortable yet, training hasn't completely clicked, and the execution just feels slower than expected. Then the pressure shifts, and now you're up against deadlines, and decisions start getting made based on time and not quality. Then the system starts to show cracks. Things behave differently under real conditions. Integrations don't respond the way you expected. And eventually, it shows up in the execution. People start finding their own way to get things done. Workarounds, reactive decisions, long hours. And at that point, it's just not internal anymore. Now the customers are feeling it. Now there's financial impact. And that's how value gets lost. Let me give you a real-world example. So this was earlier in my career. I worked for a large telecom company. They had just acquired a satellite entertainment business, and we were consolidating multiple warehouses into a single brand new facility. And we had 6 months to make that happen. And at that time, that was extremely aggressive. Today, 6 months is a little more manageable, but back then it was not. And that timeline was locked. There was no option to extend it. We had to be out and fully operational, and that deadline drove everything. And at the same time, we were starting from scratch. New processes. We had to map from the existing operation to a new system, new integrations, and a team that had never used this system before. It was complex from the start, and there was no ramp up. Everything had to work on day one. Where we tested thoroughly, those things worked. Where we made assumptions, that's where we saw the issues. That experience made one thing very clear for me. Success is not determined at the end. It's determined by the decisions you make along the way. And this is where the idea of speed versus quality, it really starts to break down, because the fastest teams are not the ones that move the quickest. They're the ones that prepare the best. And that's exactly where we're going to go to next.
Yeah, Richard, that's an interesting story. So what drives value, right? So, and it's really, as the title has here, is really dialing it in before you floor it, right? Before you bring the speed. So Richard's going to go over kind of four basic but very important ideas. Is first of all, aligning goals, right? Making sure that the corporate goals are matching what the output of the solution set should be. Prioritizing changes. What comes first? Is it the core of the system, or do we look at what should be happening later on? Richard talked a little about testing and kind of validating everything that should happen, right? Maybe not just step-by-step procedures, but also maybe integrations that have to happen with different tool sets. And also stabilizing the performance. So, Richard, I'll let you kind of explain these things.
Sure. All right. So one of the biggest drivers of success is alignment. Your WMS has to support what the business is actually trying to achieve. And that starts with having a clear roadmap, not just for today, but for where the business is going in the future. So that means aligning your system configuration to how the warehouse actually operates. So one of the biggest issues we see when a system is designed in isolation from the operation, you end up with something that technically works, but it doesn't actually fit how the business runs. So, for example, you might design a picking process that looks efficient on paper, but in reality, right, it doesn't match how the orders flow or how the labor is scheduled or how the product is actually handled. So when that happens, the system creates friction instead of removing it. And we see this all the time with automation and newer technologies like AI. Companies want to make an investment, right? But it's not always clearly tied to a specific problem in the operation. There's not a clear answer to what problem are we actually trying to solve. And when that alignment isn't there, you might be improving something, but it's not the thing that really matters. And over time, that just starts to add more and more complexity, more configurations, more exceptions, more workarounds. And at that point, the system really isn't helping the operation anymore. It's just making it harder to run. So the next piece here is prioritization. So the simplest place to start is ask, where does it hurt? Most teams know what to improve. They just try to do it all at once. So everything is moving, but nothing is actually getting better. And that's the problem. It's not really about doing more. It's about doing the right things in the right order. So where do you focus first, right? One of the biggest levers is labor. So if you can reduce travel time, if you can reduce touches, if you can simplify decisions, you see immediate results. Another thing we look for is what we call shadow processes. So someone's maintaining a spreadsheet on the side, it usually means the system isn't doing what they need it to do. So instead of fixing the problem, we end up working around it. And that's why prioritization matters. You fix the problem, not the workaround. And just as important, you go want to bring the operations into any decision early, because if they're not part of the solution, it's not going to stick. So the next Next thing we're going to cover is testing. And it's probably the most important part of all of this. It's what actually turns your requirements into real world performance. And it's not about the controlled scenarios. It's about real volume, real exceptions, and real users. And that includes both sides of testing, right? You've got the happy path where everything works the way you expect it to. And then you got your exceptions, right? Where things don't. And that's where the system actually breaks, right? Most systems aren't tested that way. They're tested in ideal conditions, clean data, perfect scenarios, and no pressure. And guess what? That's not reality, right? Most companies don't have dedicated test teams. So the operational team ends up doing double duty. And so they're trying to run the warehouse and they're trying to validate the system. And that creates constraints, right? They've got limited time, you got limited resources. So testing often gets compressed. And that's where most of these issues start to show up. And that's why at Tryon, we've actually moved towards automated and performance testing, not just to test faster, but to test in a way that actually reflects how the operations run. So automated testing gives you the consistency. You can run the same scenarios over and over and know exactly what changed. And then performance testing shows you what happens under system load, high order volume, peak conditions, real system pressure. Because when the system works in testing, um, even though a system works in testing, it can still fail under real demand, right? And that's the gap we're trying to close with performance testing between it works and it works when it matters. So if you get testing right, everything gets easier. If you get it wrong, everything gets harder. So finally, we move on to stabilization. So you cannot improve a moving target. That's one of the biggest mistakes we see, right? It's trying to optimize before stabilizing. Changes get layered on top of a change and then another and then another. And eventually, no one knows what's actually working under all of that code, right? So from an operations perspective, your confidence drops dramatically. And if the system's not feeling, if the system feels inconsistent, people stop relying on it. And when that happens, they don't fix the root problem. They find their own way. That's when you get workarounds, manual steps, side processes. Now you're managing everything around the system instead of the actual system itself. And that's where things start to break down, right? So stabilization means fixing root issues, building consistency, and creating discipline because you can't optimize something that isn't stable. And if you skip that step, every change just feels like another disruption. So stability is what makes real improvement possible.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, there's a lot of good points there. And I like your stabilization first, right before adding. So at the kind of the tail end of this, we want to kind of recap what this all means and really how you can sustain the performance of the values that Richard was explaining. So first of all, it is kind of a mindset, right? So it's not just about implementing all these different tools and all these different processes and robotics and AI and reports and stuff, but it's more about implementing what matters, especially first, right? And we always like to say if you're not able to report on it, right? If it doesn't have a KPI, as we say, it should probably not move forward, at least not right away, right? And one of the values we always bring up when we're talking with our clients is that the fact that technology enables the value where the operations really define what that process and what that value should be. That's where the connection between ops and IT really exists. Another good point that Richard made is really stabilizing before you optimize, right? He couldn't say this enough, right? So you cannot accelerate performance on the kind of an unstable foundation, right? That's the key word there, is making sure that your stability is really kind of the baseline of where that real value can be measured and seen, especially from a customer perspective. The last part as Richard mentioned, is really the most important part is testing for outcomes, right? Yes, you can test for performance. You can test for if something is really working, but it's really not about that. It's more about how the test is really improving the operations and the goals that you're really going after, right? So we always say validate kind of real world scenarios, and measure kind of before, during, and after the processes and improvements are being made within your system and your processes, right? And that's where the true return on investment can be proven. So when we talk about upfront about not being able to share risks or share important information with your leadership, that's where return on investment can really help you succeed in your operation. So Richard and I want to thank you for your time today, and hopefully you were able to take away a couple of value points, and maybe how you can kind of speed up some processes in the long run. Please reach out to tryonsolutions.com or call our number or email us. We are a global organization and willing to help you any way that we can. So thank you very much for participating. Thank you.
Thanks.